Protests and some riots erupt throughout the United States, and Israel seems to have started another war. The different reactions that we get across America and across the world, as well as a new interview that came out with Vice President JD Vance, is going to highlight a lot of what we talk about on the show. We'll be talking about a little bit more and get into the nuance, I think, of some of the topics to the best of my ability. I'm your host, Sal Asante. This is the We the Patriots podcast. Welcome back to the show, and let's have a good one.
This thing that's in my brain, it keeps me from wanting to go on, but I want some gain. Maybe a little fame.
So, this has been a very Trumpian week, if I may say so myself. And what I mean by that is there's a lot happening very quickly. And I think it's important to try to pay attention to the things that matter and throw away the things that don't. So as we get into it, keep in mind there'll be some topics I kind of glance over, some topics that I hit a little harder. This is just kind of how I'm feeling like we got to talk about things, and especially order of importance as well is kind of crucial. But if there's something else that you want me to talk about, if there is other topics, some of these are actually brought on by a lot of conversations I'm having outside of the podcast, what I'm going to be talking about, what I'm breaking down. So if you have thoughts, you have things that you want to be covered, let me know. I'll make a show about it, maybe make an extra show about it. Not really sure how I want to go about it, but without any further ado, let's get right into the protests. So there were a ton of protests out in Los Angeles area. A lot of this was centered around immigration. And then furthermore, there were more protests that were staged across the country actually yesterday, recording this on Sunday, yesterday, where I think some of the messaging may have been mixed, but what a lot of people are calling them is the No Kings protest. So first, let's talk about what happened in LA. In LA, a lot of turmoil over the immigration policy of the United States, and especially centered around deportations. Now, I think it's neither here nor there. I've talked about this on multiple shows, talked about this with John on the podcast. There has been, we'll just say, a lackadaisical treatment over the past 4 to 6 years in the border enforcement and immigration enforcement in general, immigration law. And now that it's snapping back to somewhat of a reality, I think that it is shocking to people. Now, I have to be honest with you, I do not see enforcing immigration law and enforcing borders as being racist, as being anti-immigrant. Really, it's actually very respectful of immigrants, and here's why. There are many people that went through the entire process, paid a lot of money, and worked with their own blood, sweat, and tears to get into this country legally, and allowing mass illegal immigration like the previous administration has done and previous administrations have done as well. It really sours the pot for those people that worked hard enough, worked their butts off for years in order to get into this country legally. And I think that the rising up of people in order to get behind this defense of illegal immigration is astounding to me. You see a fight breaking out between the governor of California, Gavin Newsom, and the president of the United States, Donald Trump. You see a clash of words. You're seeing troops sent. You're seeing even, I saw articles laying out that the Marines were sent, some confirming, some denying that that's actually the case. I'm not here to argue about that. What I'm really concerned about is how we as a people are seemingly a decent chunk of us. Now, LA is a very left of center place, and I can understand that. But we as American people, we first of all voted pretty outstandingly in order to enforce our border. I think that that was pretty clear with the last election. And not only that, to be a sovereign nation, you have to have a border. You have to have a line that demarks where Canada and the United States splits, and furthermore, where the United States and Mexico splits. It just has to happen. It can't all be one land. And it's disappointing to me as well that when you're seeing these protests, you're not seeing any American flags. You're seeing the country of origins flags. You're seeing Mexican flags, Dominican flags, Honduran flags. You're seeing places that are not America. So what I can't comprehend is, if you are so determined in order to stay in the United States, why are you seemingly so obsessed with your country of origin that's so bad you can't return? I just don't get it. I'm not trying to use that as a straw man. I think that that's just an obvious point. I can't really get past the fact that these people seemingly want to hold on to their identity of the nation that they left that has been so bad, that doesn't give them economic opportunity, X, Y, and Z. Can make so many other points, but at the end of the day, they're not conforming to America. They're not conforming to our rules of law. They're not conforming to our culture. Why do they want to remain? I'm very, very confused about that. And it's an aspect of this that is really throwing me off in my understanding and my ability to empathize with the people that are taking part in these protests, and especially when it divulges into a riot. Once it gets to a point where a riot, and not to say that that was the entirety of the protest, I think it's pretty clear that that was offshoots, and again, not the entirety, but when it does become that, it changes everything. There needs to be law and order, and what was very clearly pointed out, or at least to me, was that Gavin Newsom was going to do nothing in order to stop this rioting, the looting. And there's an important point before we move on to the more general protests across the country, which didn't seem to get too violent, so that's a good thing. But there's a pretty important point to be made here. So a lot of people online that are complaining, not even complaining, that don't seem to care that there was property destruction in these riots. That is the foundation of this country. One of the foundation. One of the foundational principles of this country is property rights. You have to remember what property represents, whether you're talking about someone's vehicle that they purchase, whether you're talking about their home, their business. These people have spent one of the only currencies in human life that you can't get back, and that's time. Time is represented in property, whether it is that you worked, you got money in exchange for your time spent working, and then you exchange that money for an asset, a piece of property. That's one way to achieve it. Another way would be that it was gifted to you. And if you received that gift, that means that somebody else put their hours in, put their time, traded their time for valued asset, and gave that asset to you. So that's someone else's time. And any which way that you may have gotten that property, whether you purchased it yourself, it was gifted to you. It is a representation of time, human capital spent. And not treating that with respect is not respecting other people. It's not taking into account the amount of time, effort, blood, sweat, and tears that somebody may have put into building a business, getting their home built, purchasing their home, purchasing their car. If you don't care about that property, then you don't care about American values. That's just the bottom line of it. There's no real argument. And I think that it's very important for us as Americans to remember our roots a little bit here. And it's something that I think is kind of a theme over the past few episodes here. But we need to get back to that point where we're condemning this stuff. Because if you are one of those people that is okay with the riots here, or okay with the 2020 riots over George Floyd, well, I think that it's imperative that you take a step back and recognize that you are defending a lawless nature. And if that's something that you're okay with, I don't think that you belong in this country. I don't mean it in the way of get out. I mean, you need to, you as the people, if that is how you feel, you need to, I think about why you are here. What is it that makes you want to live here? Whether it be economic opportunity, cultural, families here. There's so many different things that it could be. If you're not going to treat other people's stuff, time, and their life with respect, then there's probably other places that are better suited for you. And I think it's very disrespectful to not only the American tradition, but our neighbors. And by neighbors, I don't mean the people living right next to me. And in the neighbors, our neighborhood, the community, it's very disrespectful to them to not treat them and their property with respect. So I just had to get that out there. I think that the the sentiment that property does not hold value, that property doesn't matter, that we should not feel bad about these people losing their property. Well, I think you say that until it comes to your doorstep or until you own something that is of value to you. So now I'm going to push a little bit further here. So with the countrywide protest that happened, the No Kings protest, as it's called, I think what people are failing to understand is that Donald Trump only has 3.5 years left of his presidency. If he tried to run again, it would be unconstitutional. There's going to be no judge that opens that up to him. I can guarantee you that. And not only that, authoritarian is maybe a way you could describe how presidential edicts and executive orders may come down. But at the end of the day, there's a cabinet, there is advisors that make up a lot of these suggestions. It just doesn't, it's not the case here. So I think that many people are really missing the point. If you disagree with someone's policies, you have all power to you. You have a right to protest is absolutely ingrained in our First Amendment. And again, the fact that many of these protests, the No Kings protests as they're called, did not get violent, I think it kind of goes to show that that's the way that a protest should be done. Now, one thing that soured these protests was actually something extremely sad. I don't have all the details in front of me, so I'm just going off of what I remember here. But there were, believe, multiple Minnesota Congress people, men and women, targeted for attack, seemingly in a politically motivated attack in Minnesota. One of them lost their life for sure. I believe another one either got shot or is avoided getting shot but was shot at, something to that magnitude. And that story actually ran pretty much over this whole protest timeline because people are obviously going to be more attracted to a story like that, politically motivated killing. And it's very sad that things are getting to this point. The ratcheting up of tensions, it seems to be the cause and effect here. Seems to be what's happening. And it's unfortunate. Again, I think that maybe these protests were a little misguided, but at the end of the day, you have every right to protest. You have a freedom of speech. You have the ability to say what you want, what you feel. I think it being misguided should be pointed out. I think if you have a disagreement on policy, that's where it should be focused and not necessarily, well, not really at all, aimed at the fact that you think Donald Trump is a king or dictator, because he's not. He was voted in by the American people actually popularly, which goes to show a lot of things. So with all that said, I kind of want to move on from the riot and protest kind of point of view, because that stuff, at the end of the day, that stuff happens every day to a lesser degree or a larger degree, depending on the day, depending on the topic, and how much it actually hits the hearts of the American people. Moving on from there, there was one of the, how do I want to put this? One of the sadder events and timelines and stories to come out in quite some time. Now, we covered, and we have been covering since the beginning, the Israel and Gaza war that has been going on for now going on a year and a half, just about something to the order of about 14 to 16 months it's been going on. And Israel has now ratcheted that up. Now, I'm not trying to say that Israel is the sole one to blame here, but I do think they bear a lot of the blame. And I think the American political reaction, especially from our politicians, is something to be noted and something to be afraid of. So let me get into what I'm talking about here. The Gaza war still exists and it's still going on. And originally, I don't know if this video is even still up. I know it was on our website before we took it down. If I got to put it back up, I'll put it back up on the Substack page because I'm not putting it here. But originally, on the attacks, with the attacks coming from Gaza, October 7th of 2023, when that event occurred, I made a very instant reaction video, and what I said, just to encapsulate the argument I was trying to get forth, was that Israel has every right to defend itself. It's a very saddening event that happened, clearly a devastating event and is a disastrous event. Many civilians injured, killed, and kidnapped. However, I thought it was imperative, and it is imperative on Israel's behalf to respond appropriately and respond proportionally. And at this point, I think it's pretty clear to all of us in the rest of the world that they have not responded, not just, they have responded, I should say, inappropriately. I think that's pretty clear. But not only that, they've responded extremely disproportionately. The amount of civilians that are killed compared to combatants is something to the magnitude of between, you could see estimates anywhere from 1 to 1, which doesn't make any sense to me how that's okay to kill just as many civilians as combatants, but we'll move past that. It goes anywhere from there to all the way up to 3 to 1. I want you to tell me in what world it's okay to kill 3 civilians for every militant that's involved in a conflict. That's just bizarre to me. And again, with the numbers that we're dealing with, we're talking about somewhere around the ballpark of between 40 and 60,000 people dead in Gaza. The math doesn't add up. You're talking about anywhere, if that ratio is true, you're talking about anywhere from 30,000 to maybe all the way up to even 40 or 50,000 civilians killed. And I just can't fathom that any other world power would be able to get away with something like this without having to face some serious repercussions. And Israel is, at this point, still has a lot of the backing, especially of the right wing of the United States, and the current president and the House, the Senate has all the backing. And from here, instead of finishing out their war in Gaza, instead of coming to some diplomatic solution, some sort of peace, instead of getting there, they decide to rope in another person. And another point of that original call out, that instant reaction, was that The last thing that I want to see this become is not a direct conflict, but a regional conflict. And given the, now, this is important to say before I make my next point, given the nature of Iran and their relationship to Hamas, many people will call them a proxy, some people will not. There's a little bit of a war with semantics there. At the end of the day, Iran supplies a lot of the material, a lot of the training to Hamas, so it can be viewed as a proxy. But attacking Hamas and attacking the people in Gaza is a very different implication than it is to attack Iran. And here's why. Iran is a sovereign nation. Gaza is not. Gaza is led by essentially, not even essentially, quite literally, a terrorist organization and Hamas. They are led there. That is their leadership. And they're not a sovereign nation. So with that being said, attacks on Gaza, attacks on the Gazans, the Palestinian people, however you want to term it, are a different, even though it is still human life, and I'm in full agreement with that, it is a different, lack of better word, it's a different ball game than attacking Iran. Iran being a sovereign nation, just like Israel, has every right, in my opinion, and the opinion I would think of most people that follow international politics, once a war is started on someone's behalf, it is your duty as a sovereign nation to respond, whether that be diplomatically, militarily, or a combination of both, whatever it may be. Iran was attacked. And again, you can make an argument, maybe not fully unprovoked, if you're arguing that Hamas is a proxy of Iran, but unprovoked at the end of the day. No direct action was taken by Iran to force Israel to do this. And it seems like a lot of the justification is something that is a tired old trope to me. This kind of takes us into another point that I want to make on this issue, because it is alarming that so many people still consider this a viable reason in order to attack Iran. And that is that we can't allow, I'm in air quotes for people listening, we can't allow Iran to get a nuclear weapon. Iran's very close to a nuclear weapon. Their nuclear program, this, that, and the other. Okay. Well, take a step back here and follow just how long the sentiment has been held or been being espoused by just Netanyahu himself. Research that I did comes up with something around 33 years, give or take, that he's been saying that Iran is somewhere between 6 months and 5 years away from achieving a nuclear weapon, from gaining a nuclear weapon. But he's been saying it for 33 years, the same thing over and over and over again. And if that is the case, well, somebody's trying to pull the hood over our heads. And if we're unwilling to recognize that Israel may have done this attack in a way to escalate what was, again, a direct conflict between them and Gaza, them and Hamas, and escalate it to now include a sovereign nation in Iran and possibly all of Iran's allies and their proxies, their definite proxies. I don't have anything else other to say, but that is not our problem as Americans. However, here's the biggest issue, and that has been the American political response. And I will say, on the behalf of probably everybody except for Donald Trump, has been okay. So some of the more disgusting things that I've seen, I'm not going to lay them out exactly verbatim, but some of the more disgusting things I've seen have come from people like John Fetterman, Mike Johnson, Lindsey Graham, of course, Senator Ted Cruz, have all come out in full support of Israel making this initial attack. Again, unprovoked. You can maybe argue a little bit that with Hamas being in the status that they are and as much supplied by Iran, that maybe that's not entirely true. But again, no direct action by Iran other than them allegedly having a nuclear program or being close to a nuclear weapon, which I will again say has been the talking point of someone like Benjamin Netanyahu for over 30 years at this point. An unprovoked attack on Iran by Israel and cheering it on. And some people even making jokes about it, going rah-rah. Lindsey Graham, I think, said game on or something like that. And I could be misattributing that because there was a lot of people saying a lot of crazy shit, pardon the language, about this issue. And I'm just baffled. But the general sentiment from the people that I mentioned, like I said, John Fetterman, Mike Johnson, Lindsey Graham, a lot of them are saying that we have to give Israel our full support, and they support the action taken, and we support further actions. Well, again, I'll bring up the fact that I think that we need to be honest, and I would wish that our politicians would be honest about the fact that Israel is starting all of these fights. Maybe not October 7th, but their reaction to it is definitely outsized the impact that they have received, especially on October 7th. So it is unbelievable to me the amount of support that American politicians are giving to Israel, and I just can't I can't really fathom why that's the case. There are many people that I'm not gonna lie. No, we talked about this in a previous show, but I really am starting to question on whether they are for America or for Israel, and that's a disgusting thought to have. Dual loyalty is supposed to be punishable offense. It might even be punishable with treason charges. I'm not going that far. I'm just saying that it seems like these people that are leading our country, a lot of them have mixed intentions. And maybe not even mixed. Maybe they are strictly pro Israel and trying to get the best possible outcome from America to help Israel. And if that's the case, you don't belong in our politics. You don't belong as a congressman. You don't belong as a senator. And you don't belong in the presidential cabinet. I just can't fathom how that's possible. Talk about people like Mark Levin, who's been egging on attacks on Iran for God knows how long, just as long as Netanyahu, probably. Ben Shapiro, the same thing. Very influential people in the conservative movement. And they just are happy. They're gleeful that this happened. And of course, Iran responds, attacks Israel. Seemingly, I will point out, Israel's original attack on Iran was seemingly pretty targeted at their nuclear facilities, at leaders and whatnot. And Iran seems to have kind of gone scattershot and attacked everything all at once. Now, sure, you could say that that is outsized, that it's not a great reaction. I'm not trying to argue on Iran's behalf. I'm trying to argue that Israel started this fight. And I do not think that it is anything that Americans should have to touch with a 10-foot pole. There's no reason to. We're really not threatened by Iran, especially if we're not meddling in the affairs of the Middle East. We really shouldn't. The only reason that we're involved is because of the amount of help that we have levied in order to prop up Israel and make sure that their military is fully supplied, make sure that they have everything that they need. I think that that needs to be put on the line. I think that, and again, so let's go to what Donald Trump has responded with. He's been very anti Iran, but he has not come out in full fledged support of Israel, it seems, the same way that a lot of his constituents have. But he's come out trying to force Iran to the table, and I just think that that's not feasible. What you're asking for is for a sovereign nation to not respond to an attack, very unlike the attacks that were levied on Israel on October 7th, and that they're, again, this is a sovereign nation. You're asking them not to respond. It seems a little bit like you're talking out of both sides of your face. And this goes for all of those people that I mentioned, tons more. I'm not going to have the whole list here. I'm not going to try to find a list. There were tens and tens, if not hundreds, of Congress people serving the United States that are in full support of Israel, even doing an offensive strike like that to an unprovoked enemy. I am just tired of this issue. I'm tired of us having to go fight other people's battles. I'm tired of supplying both sides of wars. I'm tired of all of this. And I think that one thing, to get off this topic and kind of get off my soapbox here, because I'm not trying to seem that way, one thing that we really need to focus is on how especially our leaders talk to us, and at the end of the day, sometimes they really do act like we are stupid. So I want to talk about the JD Vance interview. And so JD Vance went on with seemingly a good friend of his, Theo Vaughn. Theo had some really strong questions to ask, and I applaud him, honestly, on his interviewing ability. He did a great job. And he got JD Vance to talk about things very candidly, honestly. And I think, this is just my opinion, but the way that JD Vance answered a lot of these questions, I think that he does not respect the American intelligence. I do not think that he respects you, the American people, to be able to come up with judgments that are pro America, that are pro freedom, pro individualism. You'll just have to see for yourself as I lay them out. So the interview started very candidly and very homey. They were talking about a lot of things currently going on with their personal lives and whatnot. I really didn't have any issue with it. It is actually nice to see politicians coming down to earth, speaking like they are normal human beings and not having to be held to press conference standards or being held to a 5-minute interview on Fox or CNN. I think it's great. The problem that I had was when Theo started asking some really important political fact or questions, I should say, some questions about current politics. The first one that I had an issue with, I may be going out of order here, but I think that I got it basically on the timeline, was when Theo asked a question revolving around the giant bill, the big, beautiful bill, the bill that we went over maybe a week or two ago now that was pretty full of pork. And by pork, I mean full of bullshit in order to get people to vote for it. But at the end of the day, what this has really become, and it's become a pretty standard in American politics, which I don't like, is that we being the American leaders, I didn't do it myself, but American politicians seem to throw tons of issues into a single bill and make people vote on it instead of arguing over the semantics of one singular argument at a time. And I'm in huge disagreement with this. I think that any bill or any law that gets passed should be passed on its own, should be argued about in front of everybody. And instead, they put tons of litigation, tons of different things into this bill that can cause ripple effects in so many different directions. One of the things that you do when you're testing, like let's think about science. If you're trying to isolate what's working, what's not, or you're trying to do an experiment, you isolate one variable of an equation, you keep that the same, and the other isolated variable is what you change. And then you change that out until you get the reaction either that you want or whether you're searching for different reactions, whatever it is. Manipulating as many variables as the American government is at one time is kind of confusing the cause and effect that happens when instituting law, I think. Now, I'm no politician, I'm no lawyer, but I would think that treating politics, treating law, creation, treating policy as an experiment to manipulate singular variables at a time would be a good strategy. Now, on this first point, JD Vance answered in this way, saying that I'm paraphrasing here. I'm not going word for word, so don't take me on this. Go listen to I urge you to go listen to the interview yourself and see how you feel about it. But it made me really, I don't want to say dislike Vance, but really distrust him in the same way that I distrust every single politician. I thought that he was somewhat different, but he's just a very intelligent man and knows how to speak. So what he was arguing is that the bill needs to be large because we don't have enough time. We need to combine a lot of issues that aren't connected, or it would take over a year, was actually a quote from him. And my argument would be that that's a good thing. Why do we need to throw in all these things, get people to vote on them, when at the end of the day, maybe these people just wanted to vote on tax policy? Maybe these people just wanted to vote on spending, but at the end of the day, you're voting on spending, tax policy, border, AI bills. You're voting on so many different things coming together that you don't even know what you're voting for at some points. And I even saw one apparently was a meme account, but I saw multiple posts by alleged current congressmen saying, I didn't even get to see that this was a part of the bill. Well, yeah, I partially blame that person for not being able to read or not being able to have their staff read it, but I also blame the creators of the bill for making something that is not able to be read in a short amount of time. I think that a bill should be easily taken in by an average American. They should be able to read the bill, understand what's happening in the bill, and understand why the politicians voted on it instead of having thousands of pages of nonsense at the end of the day. And what I think might need to be a possibility might be that you vote on a bill that is not talking about the exact specifics, but maybe highlights. And I don't mean just highlight, but talks about what's actually being done. And maybe there's another bill that includes all the different impacts of law. Because I can understand too that maybe you need to knock down hundreds of different pieces of code and rebuild them, or include all this jargon, this legal speak. I get that part, but it needs to be able to be swallowed by the American public. We need to know what we're voting on. We're not voting, the American public's not voting on these bills directly, but we're voting on the people who do vote for these. And I think we need to understand what our people are voting for consistently. These giant bills don't really help anything in that measure. And not only that, I want to talk about a different point that is not often said, and that is that lockstep in government is not usually a good thing. It's actually gridlock that is good for the American economy, the American people. And why is that? It's because it provides stability. When things are not able to be changed and you have to go with the current law as it is written and stick with it, and that becomes consistent over a number of years, people are able to, I don't want to say predict might be the wrong word, but assume a normal state and be able to work off of that normal state rather than having it change every 2 to 4 years, or relying on a new president to change the tax or whatever. It's actually a good thing when the government is not really doing anything. And that doesn't matter where we're coming from, whether we're based on very democratic side of lawmaking, tax policy, or whether we're on a very conservative and Republican style laws and tax make. All of this doesn't matter. So being as though you had an ability, or you have an ability constantly, it seems, to push forth bill by bill, law by law, and really nitpick, get arguments in front of the floor, get people to, who are allegedly our leaders, some of the smartest people in the country, get them to get their views out on singular issues. I couldn't think of a better place to be, even if it takes over a year. Let's argue down to tooth and nail of, should we have tax on overtime, tax on tips? Should we be lowering the taxes? Should we be increasing the single payer deduction? These little things have huge implications. Why throw them all together with Medicare, Medicaid, SNAP programs, the welfare in general? Why throw them all in together when it does not actually help anybody? Now, as Vance continued and he was talking about this bill, he talked about it as if it was not, not a perfect bill and none will ever be, but it was a good bill. And he argued that it does not raise the spending, it actually cuts the spending. And he says that it only raises, which was a little contradictory, I might add, it only raises spending for military and border implementation. Okay, now on the first count, he's actually wrong. It does raise spending, and I want to talk about why. So, number one, the military spending is going up through the roof. That already happened last time with Trump. It's not really anything new. And border enforcement, that's going up. But I think that could be understood, and I don't disagree that that might be good spending given the place that we're coming from the previous administration. Okay, understandable. But to tell me that the spending is not going up while it actually is a lie, and I don't appreciate that. Just be honest. The spending is going up, and here's why. If you are solidifying tax cuts, which is what it is, really just solidifying the 2017, I believe, tax cuts by President Trump and solidifying them going forward rather than them sunsetting. Let's do a little bit of math. If you're trying to balance the budget of the United States government at the federal level, and you are proposing to take in less tax revenue by nature, if you are taking in less revenue, but the spending either stays the same or goes up, does that sound like this bill is costing money or it is saving money? At the end of the day, it's a pretty simple equation. You're not bringing in enough money, but you're still throwing it out or possibly increasing the spending a little bit. You are actually having a bigger deficit. That's a problem. And I think also raising the tax ceiling, or I apologize, the debt ceiling, raising the debt ceiling again doesn't get talked about enough, but that's a problem. Why even call it a debt ceiling if every time we hit it, you're going to raise it? It's not really a ceiling then. It's pretty glass made. And I just can't, again, I can't really disagree more with Vance on this. And I do think that he's not really allowing the American people to think. Well, maybe he is. He's trying to coax you onto his way of thinking, but I don't think that you should. It's pretty obvious that, again, they're not going to be taxing at the same level, or at least the level that was expected. Military spending is going up. There are some cuts to programs like SNAP, Medicare, Medicaid, and there'll be overall, again, less money coming into the government by way of taxes and more money going out in spending. That's a larger deficit that is actually increasing the spending overall. And it's a disappointment to hear him talk to this point and, in my opinion, just kind of act like we don't understand it, because I think it's a pretty simple one to understand, actually. Of all things that politicians talk about, spending is something that we all have to do. We all have to balance our budget. If we ran up debt numbers like the United States, we would be bankrupt 10 times over. So I just don't really appreciate the way that he was talking about that. Another thing that outside of this big bill that got brought up, another thing that was talked about was I guess actually this part was kind of a part of the bill, was that I believe Theo kind of threw in a question there that there's no ability to hold accountable the leaders of AI. Vance kind of danced around this part. Again, it kind of just goes back to the point that we don't need to be voting on bills that are constructed like big giant pieces of pork, because it includes a bunch of stuff that really isn't very supported by most of the government. So moving on from that, they also talked about Peter Thiel. Now, if you don't know who Peter Thiel is, I don't really know too much about him either. All I know is that he is a major part of the company Palantir. I believe I talked about last week. Palantir being a massive AI corporation, conglomerates data. They put databases, they could sift through databases, find all this different stuff utilizing AI. He's actually a massive supporter of Vance himself. Now, according to Vance, there was no reason that he should feel one way or the other about voting on AI legislation just because he had massive donations from Peter Thiel. But the big problem for me actually came from when he was arguing on behalf of Palantir and saying why he thinks it's a good thing. His argument, which I think is very anti-liberty, very anti-American, was that the government already has all of our data. So having a company oversee it isn't any more or less negative than what already exists in place today. And to me, it's not only is it anti-American, it's really anti-conservative values. At the end of the day, and to call yourself a conservative and have this belief is not really possible. I don't think that that's a conservative viewpoint. You're looking for oversight. You're looking for a more autocratic version of America, which should not exist. And instead of arguing to fix the problem of the government having too much of our personal information, you're actually arguing that, well, the problem's already down the road. Well, Can't fix it now. That's the argument that's being made by Vance, and I thought it was very disingenuous. I thought it was a very poor argument. Again, I really think at the end of the day, kind of putting you in a position as the American people to not make this decision on your own, where you're saying, yeah, well, I'm not very comfortable with just some outside company having access to all of my data, all my personal data. It's not what I voted for, and it's not what I voted for, to be honest. I'm very disappointed in this, in the direction that Trump is heading and the Trump administration is going with this. I see what they're doing, and I'm not a fan of it. There'll be many people that'll make the argument that, well, I can't see Trump doing anything bad. Well, that's not the point. First of all, the point is not comfortable with in the first place, no matter who is at the head. That's just my opinion. But second of all, even if you hold that viewpoint, it's like that same thing where there was just law after law and position after position being forced through by a, I'm not going to call them democratic, but a left-leaning Supreme Court. And there were many people on the right saying, well, just wait for the shoe to be on the other foot and you're not going to like it. Well, now that the shoe's on the other foot, many Democrats don't like the way that the Supreme Court's been acting. Well, do you think we liked it when it was the other way around? That's kind of the point being made here. It doesn't matter who is at the head when this is installed. What matters is that that shoe can be on the other foot tomorrow, and we as the American people aren't very comfortable with anybody having this much power. Doesn't matter if it's Trump, doesn't matter if it's Biden. That's the way that I feel about it. And that's the way that most people around me feel about it. That it's really not a matter of, oh, the government already has this information. You shouldn't have this information in the first place. Do not sell me down the road like that. I don't know. Just very disappointed on that. Then everything came back, and to get back onto Israel, it's like I'm getting back onto a shitty train at the end of the day, but I got to talk about it. On Israel, there was some points made by Vance that I thought kind of fell in line with a lot of the conservative talking points. Now, Theo is expressing things in his way very recently. Actually, I'm sure a lot of you saw this if you're on the online space. Theo came out. He was kind of upset that about what's happening in Gaza. He feels that it is a genocide that's going on, and he mentioned this to Vance. He said, I feel like this is a genocide going on. How do you feel about this? How do you respond? And Vance kind of broke it down, very politician like. Said that there would be other requirements for it to actually achieve something like a genocide, but made the point that Israel has the right to defend itself. They were attacked, and they have the ability to respond. Now, of course, keep in mind this is before what happened with Iran, so you need to kind of take that out of your mind for a second. Now, he did a very good job at explaining that Israel had the right to defend himself, but anytime that he was put kind of on the pedestal by Theo, and not that Theo really pushed him super hard, but anytime he was put there where it's like, well, okay, what about the civilians? Or like, are you okay with this? He kind of just didn't really acknowledge it, and he didn't really put it in a light that made it seem like he's understanding the problem entirely. So at the end of the day, when I looked at the entirety of this interview, whether you're talking about the Israel part, you're talking about the way that he kind of skirted around the giant bills and the fact that it includes a bunch of crap that not many Americans are happy about, voted for, however you want to argue it. And then on top of that, it's trying to sell you down the river with this AI stuff. That, I'll be honest, I really don't know anyone that's comfortable with it. A lot of people anti-Trump hate it. But a lot of people that are for Trump really don't like the idea of an AI company having access and parsing through all of our personal data. At the end of the day, I just didn't like it. And it really made me think that JD Vance, thinks that us, the American people, are dumb, that we can't follow his logic. We don't have the ability to look at things under a microscope or understand problems for ourselves. Whether you're talking about Israel, you're talking about AI, you're talking about the ability to, like I said, be able to read a bill. I really didn't like the way he came off. And I think that it really kind of pushed that old kind of mantra that we got to go with the status quo of politics and not be a real shaker. And I disliked it. I'll be honest. I would like you guys to go get your own kind of thoughts on the interview. I thought that it was good to listen to because, again, it gave a good, clear insight on really everything going on around the world. Again, this is pre-Iran strikes by Israel, so there's a pretty big change that was marked here. But at the end of the day, again, wasn't a huge fan of Vance's responses to a lot of these questions, but I was very, very impressed with Theo Vaughn's ability to interview when I thought that he was a non-serious person. So congrats to him. I think he's doing great with the show. Good luck to him going forward. Now I'm done with that. I'm done laying into JD Vance. I just want to kind of finish up on something that we talked about last time, and that is that Trump and Elon had a little bit of a spat. Well, apparently they're buddies again. I saw that Elon publicly apologized on X. He deleted some of his tweets. I think one of them, that was the call out for him being on the Epstein list. Seemingly they made up. That's good, I guess. Um, at the end of the day, I still maintain two big egos. They were going to collapse at some point. At the end of the day, They're all just lying to you, man. Doesn't matter if it's Trump, doesn't matter if it's Vance, doesn't matter if it's Schumer, doesn't matter if it's AOC, Newsom. They're all lying to you. They all have an angle, they all have a narrative, and you as the American people have the job, I think, to vote in more responsible people and make these people lose their jobs because they're not performing. I think that that's very important going forward, and I think that it's going to be pretty interesting going into what's now going to be the 2028 election to see what this new crop of politicians is going to be. Is it going to be a JD Vance that takes up? Is it going to be another business runner, someone like a Vivek Ramaswamy? Is it going to be someone like Gavin Newsom for the Democrats, or is it going to be some further entrenched politician? Is it going to be someone like Stephen A. Smith? I just don't know. I don't think he's going to get it, by the way. I think it's going to be very interesting, but I do think that it's very important, again, for us, the American people, to realize when we're being lied to and not put up with it, not have someone like a Mitch McConnell last decades when he hasn't really done anything for America, hasn't done anything good for America. Let people like Mike Johnson go and tout pro-Israel stuff more than he touts pro-America stuff. Just not a fan of it. Get him out. See people like Trump and Vance that continually make these promises and then, I don't want to say go back on them, but not really follow through. Get them out. All these people, it's no problem to me in order to vote on something, some sort of platform that you really agree with. And when the platform doesn't get carried out, to change your mind. I think that's very American. I think that it would be very good for us as Americans to be able to talk about these issues, something like immigration, and be able to come together and make some sort of decision somewhere in the middle where we're very pro immigrant, but you got to come the right way. Can't be illegal, just as an example. Stuff with the AI. Listen, AI is happening. Not really much we could do about it. Someone does something dangerous, they should be prosecuted. They should be able to be held accountable and not get immunity through this new bill. When it comes to something like Israel, or maybe even just foreign spending on wars in general, let's be not for it, no matter who it is. We got enough problems as it is for ourselves, and it seems like a lot of our politicians are being paid for by other countries, and that's not a good sign. It's not a good feeling to think that many of our politicians care a lot more about foreign nations than they do our own country. I think that that's a problem. I think a lot of you may feel the same. I want you to let me know in the comments, and be sure to be checking out the Substack page. I got quite a busy schedule for the next few weeks, to be completely honest. So I'm probably going to push off and I don't mean to do this again, but probably going to push off this show that I'm doing on 9/11 till the end of the month. So be heads up for that. Keep paying attention to the show every week. I love you for tuning in. If you are not already, please hit that subscribe button. I would recommend probably hitting that notification bell thing. That way you get let know when we have a new show out. And other than that, I hope you all have a very blessed week, and I will catch you guys on the next one. Peace out.
I wanna be something, not nothing. Trapped inside my dream and I'm running away from these demons. But the feeling's so good, I'ma keep dreaming.